You don't get over an addiction by stopping using. You recover by creating a new life where it's easier for you not to use. If you don't create a new life, then all the factors that brought you to your addiction will catch up with you again. That really hits home. This is Collateral Damage, addiction, recovery, and all the shit in between. So let's get real. Let's get raw. Now your host, Brandy Mack.
Welcome, everyone. Today, my guest is Dr. Stacy Murphy, who owns the company Navigating Addiction, which provides education and support for loved ones of people struggling with addiction and those in recovery or in active use. Hi, Stacy. And why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you to the podcast?
Hi, Brandy. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay, so I am the humble, grateful mom of an addict with 11 years clean and the daughter of two alcoholic parents that died in their addiction. And I went to nursing school at 40, and it was right around that time that I found out that my 15-year-old daughter had very quickly escalated from marijuana to heroin, IV heroin use, and I became addicted to her addiction. So I did everything that I could think of to sort of try and force her into getting clean, made a lot of mistakes, and really just thought that by my willpower, my own sort of like dedication to her recovery and ability to keep paying for treatment after treatment, that I would be able to force her to realize that this was not a great path to be on. Fast forward 10 years, and I got first a master's degree in nursing education, and then decided to study how addiction impacts families. And while that was sort of ongoing, my daughter was in early recovery after multiple attempts at detox and PHP, IOP, the whole gamut of recovery-based treatment plans. And I went to a school that really didn't want me to study anything related to addiction. It was sort of too controversial. I remember my first doctoral chair told me that there was no existing research on the topic because it must not be important. And thank God she lived in Kansas and I live in New Jersey, because and thank God she also put it in writing, right? So she put it in writing, and I went to the dean of the school and I said, you have a choice here. You can, because they never change your chair. It's kind of unheard of. And I said, you can either get me a chair that understands what this is about, or I'm leaving your school. So they did give me a chair for my doctorate that understood what I was trying to research. And it took 3 years because there was a lot of pushback, a lot of hurdles, and 178 members of my study. And what made it kind of really wild in the area of research was that there was not one person out of the 178 that said, this doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect my life that much, right? 100% said my life is impacted by the substance use disorder of my loved one. And very soon after that, I started a company that works with treatment centers to provide family resources and education. So what we do is we take the family members of people that are in treatment, and the family members are completely lost. And our platform is there's no one right way to love an addict, right? So I, like you, was a failed Nar-Anon member. It did not work for me. They told me to release my 15-year-old daughter with love and to realize I was powerless over her. And I was like, y'all can go fuck yourself. And And I'm not going to do that. But thanks for the suggestion, because I went to Naranon thinking I was going to get some answers, right? And what
Of
they
course.
said was, there's nothing you can do. And I was like, okay, so that's bullshit. And I'm going to just throw her into another treatment program, which we know that didn't work either, until she was ready. But what we say to our families is, if it helps you sleep at night, do it. So if you want to keep their phone on, not disconnect their phone service, things like that. I was actually kicked out of a Naranon Facebook group because one of the moms said, what does everybody think about me keeping the cell phone service on for my child that's still out in the street? And everybody was like, shut her phone off. She'll stop using if you shut her phone off. And I was like, oh my God. Like, who really believes that somebody's going to go, oh, now I don't have access to a cell phone anymore. I'm done with drugs. I mean, it's just a crazy thought.
It really is.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad, but there's no education. Nobody cares about the families, not the treatment centers, not
Correct.
Nobody cares. And Naranon and Al-Anon have been around since the 70s. And the picture of the addict now looks so much different than it did in the 70s. And nothing's been updated. Nothing has changed. And so we tell people, there's a kinder, gentler way to do this. But if you're being hurt, if your safety's compromised, if they're stealing your identity, if they're stealing your belongings, that's not okay. And then we provide a lot of education. Where we've sort of run into some roadblocks is getting treatment centers to understand how important it is to have an ongoing family program and not just like this flash in the pan weekend thing where they can check the box that they offer a family program. So we've been sort of pounding the pavements, trying to create awareness on that this is not a standalone disease. This is a disease that impacts everyone.
I agree. And, I have my own opinion that I've formed from going through this for the last 3.5 years and so many treatment facilities. In some ways, I think a lot of treatment facilities don't really want families involved, just in my experience. And I don't know if it has to do with manipulation tactics from the facilities, because one of the things that really just kind of surprises me is, when it comes to addiction medicine in these rehab centers, none of them are really based on evidence-based practice. It's, the main focus for majority are 12-step based programs. And I have nothing against 12-step based programs, but, like you said, they've been around for so long. And the numbers that you do occasionally come across seem to show a success rate of maybe at most 10%, which is really low considering, I believe, didn't 12 steps, I think, was developed. It was in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah. The 12-step program for the addict was in the 30s. Yes.
That's what I thought. And so I'm surprised, so many decades have gone by and we still haven't really developed a program that's evidence-based.
Yeah, it's so hard to know what to do when you're in the middle of the crisis, right? So you're in the middle of the crisis and you are sort of in the tornado with the addict, and a lot of times they step out and you're still in the center of the tornado and you're like, okay, I don't know what to do here, because many people, like in your case, have the child of the person that is going through this, or they have the bills, or they have the apartment lease or the car payment, or, so many things are left to the loved one for them to handle. And when we talk about the treatment industry, there's not a lot of evidence-based practice because I think nobody was really paying attention for so long because of the shame, right? So treatment centers were allowed to sort of, do what they were doing, and nobody was really paying attention. And there wasn't a lot of movement with research in this area because it's such a moneymaker, number one. And number two, who's going to be the person that says, let me come in and, work with your clients in this way or that way, or let's do the things, because most of the treatment center owners don't have a medical background.
Yes.
And that's where it sort of gets a little bit crazy, because it's a huge business. There's, I believe at the last count, there's over 30,000 treatment centers just in the United States. So that doesn't include worldwide. And you can look online and basically find whatever you think is important to you. But the family's a lot of times the one pushing going to treatment, and they are not even put into the mix when the person gets signed up for the treatment center.
That is correct. And actually, with my daughter, it was kind of worse for me, I think. I didn't get the typical experience because COVID was going on when we found out about her IV drug use. So, it was the panic in 2020, nobody was allowed to visit. And so places that said that they would, integrate the families into the care in some way, that seemed to completely not happen when COVID happened. And because that was one of the reasons we sent her to the first place, which was in Boise, Idaho. And so really, I haven't had any family integration, I don't think, in the 7 or 8 facilities she's gone to. The last one she went to up in Maryland, they incorporate family, but it's different. But I don't feel like the incorporation is really enough.
The craziest thing is there's no aftercare. So many places have what's called a weekend intensive, right? So you go on Fridays, you go on Saturdays, you go home on Sundays. You go home sort of very raw, very exposed, very vulnerable, and then nothing, right? So it's like, okay, now what? Because, a lot of times the treatment centers will say, you need to go to therapy on your own, or you need to go to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. And unless you can sort of hit the therapist jackpot and find somebody that is well-versed in addiction, they're in the dark with you, right? So therapy is great. And I love the idea that families could or should go to therapy. But if you're not receiving this sort of extra support, you don't know what to do. I mean, when we have our meetings, so we only crazy enough, we only have a few treatment centers that we're working with, and we've reached out to many, many other ones. And I think for money reasons, they've just declined to use us. But people don't know that they can say no to something like buying vapes or paying car payments or allowing their loved ones to come home after just 2 weeks, right? When, that has been a study that has shown that, more time spent is overall better. But I think just going back to my daughter for a minute, I think 6 times she was in and out. Her shortest relapse was 90 minutes from airport touchdown to relapse. And she wasn't ready until she was ready. So while that was all going on, I was making myself sicker and sicker, right? So I was thinking I was having a heart attack. I was in the hospital and it was anxiety. I'm only 5 feet tall. I weighed 200 pounds because I was like shoving sugar in my mouth. And not telling anybody about it, right? Because shame is what drives our interactions and sort of puts this under the cover of darkness. And how I was really convincing myself that was the right thing to do was I was saying, this is not my story. And that's bullshit, because I had a story. I was the mom of somebody with substance use disorder, because if she had diabetes or heart disease, I would be like, screaming it out loud. Like, anybody have some thoughts on this? Or what has anybody that experienced this done? But I was silent for a really, really long time. And I remember right at the beginning of my study, I was teaching for Drexel. I teach for several different local colleges, and I was teaching for Drexel, and they asked me to present my capstone, my project. And I got up in the front of the room, and there was probably 200 people there. And I said, everybody close your eyes. So everybody closed their eyes. And I said, raise your hand if your life has been impacted by drug abuse, by substance abuse. And almost the entire room raised their hand. And I said, okay, put your hand down, open your eyes. And I said, tell me why I had you all close your eyes. And somebody said, because nobody would have raised their hand if we could see which one of our peers said that this was present in their life. And at that point, I decided to live my recovery out loud and my experience so that I could help other people. Just similar to, have you been talking about it on TikTok the whole time that your daughter was using?
I did. Interestingly enough, I created a TikTok like a lot of people did, making stupid nursing videos back when the pandemic started. And and so I was just kind of having fun with it. And I had just found out about my daughter being an IV drug user, and I did not talk about it on there. But because I was pretty naive, like I thought when she said she wanted treatment, we got her into a treatment facility. I figured it was going to be a one and done. And I just, like, my mother had battled alcoholism, but she had not been in and out of treatment. And she has many, many years of sobriety now. And so I was like, she seems to want this. This is it. And she ended up relapsing a few months into being home. We were living out in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I just impulsively made a video where basically I'm like, it was just very emotional. I wasn't crying. I was just pretty angry at the time because she wrecked our car and took off. And that's how I knew she had relapsed. And
so that's the tornado, right? So she stepped out of the tornado and left you with the wreckage. Yeah.
Yes. And I really didn't have a clue at that point that she was using because we have that mental health aspect too. And so she, if she doesn't take her meds like she's supposed to, you get those mood swings. And she was notorious for not taking her meds, but I don't know how much of that was due to not wanting to take her meds or she just wanted to take drugs. It's hard to know. But I made this video and I was just like, saying my daughter wrecked her car, she relapsed, and I'm like, you guys are killing us. Literally, that was what I said. I pissed so many people off with that video. But it was just like how I felt. I was just angry, hurt, and couldn't believe it. And it that kind of started the sharing because I got a lot of hate, but I got a lot of positivity too. And that video, by all means, it didn't go viral. I mean, I probably had only had a couple hundred followers. And then I started interacting and answering questions. And I found that as I did that, it was actually very therapeutic for me speaking about it.
Well, yeah, I totally get that. And I think that the reason that it got to where your platform is because no one knows what to do. I mean, so many things are episodic, right? So the wrecking of the car, should I lend them money? Should I buy them groceries? Should I let them live in my house? Should I let them come home? It's not like you can get a book out and go, okay, page 134 says you should do this, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no one size fits all answer. It's one size fits one, right? It depends on the circumstance. And there are so many families out there just completely lost, completely have nothing, no answers. And my partner has been clean for 4 years. Georgia is her name. Mm-hmm. And we started this together. She's only 24 years old, right? And we have been marketing this. We have gone to networking events. We have presented our idea to so many places and everybody's blown away by it. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so needed. This is such a great space. And the families need this. And then we're like, okay, sign here on the dotted line. They're like, well, it's a lot of money. But what they don't understand is this is the missing connection to what's going to get their clients long-term sobriety and in my opinion, right? Because the family then is going to be able to say, I'm going to look at this situation differently and not just give you everything you want. I enabled my daughter. I had no boundaries. I allowed myself to be manipulated. Who knows if I had been able to take that stance, whether or not she would have got clean a little bit sooner. I mean, we can't know that. She does follow a 12-step program. It saved her life. Nar-Anon for me was counterintuitive because I didn't make a spare, right? Like I only had the one, right? So I was losing my mind trying to help her, but I couldn't step away. Like I could not step away from it. And I admire people that can give themselves some distance. But for her commitment to that 12-step program, and again, like you said about your mom, it's not something everybody needs. But I think recognizing when it is what you need is important to be able to honor all of that, the options, right? Because there's Dharma recovery and there's smart recovery and there's, I forget what Celebrate recovery, the Christian-based recovery, where they're surrounded by a community of like-minded people. Because I can't understand drug addiction, right? I can have a glass of wine and then it could be 30 days before I have another one, right? I just don't feel every day that mental obsession to drink or to get high, right? I, for a long time, was addicted to sugar, right? And but still, it wasn't that like get up every morning and eat candy and, soda and, these different things. So when you don't understand it, and then the person that's in substance use disorder gets to connect with people that are like-minded, that are, trying for the same thing, right? Waking up every day and just trying to, live life on life's terms without the buffer of drugs or alcohol. I feel like that's important. And I know it was important for my daughter because, like you said, I expected her to come home from treatment and just, this was done. This was going to be in the rearview mirror, right? And it most certainly was not. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really make the connection of chronic illness, right? So this is a chronic illness, no different than if somebody was to come home after going to the hospital with a blood sugar of 500. They don't come home and then it goes away, right? They go home and they have to have a plan and a program. And I was so naive, clueless. I did not understand. And it was funny. Do you follow Brandon Novak?
I might. I'd have to look him up. The name sounds familiar. I don't think he shows up on my For You page much. I'm going to look him up on my phone real quick.
He's he studied in the show Jackass. He was on with Bam Margera with the skateboarding thing. Okay. So he's like, we had him speak for us, right? So he spoke for Navigating Addiction. We had an open meeting. Everybody came. And the three things he said were: an addict is defiant by nature, hates authority, and refuses to conform. And I was like, okay, because like that is so many people that I know that are in recovery or in active addiction, that those three things are so spot on. Has that been your experience with people, including your daughter?
No, definitely. It definitely has been my experience. You know what? No, I do not follow him. I am just now looking. I follow Steve-O. And
okay.
Because he's talked a lot about, he has 15 years of sobriety. And because I know they all use pretty heavily together.
Yes. And he won't speak. He won't do like we tried to get Steve-O because we see him in different spaces, and he said no, he doesn't speak for anybody, so he wouldn't speak for us, but Brandon did. And I thought those three things were it spoke so much to the sort of personality traits of someone with substance use disorder. And this past Thursday, so I do one meeting a week in person in New Jersey. And one of the kids there this week said, I was an addict before I ever took any drugs or alcohol. I had an addictive personality. I was reckless. I was extreme. I didn't listen to anybody. I only did what I wanted to do, and I had no regard for my own life and my own safety. And I was like,
yep, that sounds a lot like my daughter.
My daughter too.
Yeah. From a young age, it's something my other daughter and I have spoken about. My mom actually is because she actually had gone to live with my mom for a period of time because my mom was very laxed. Basically, her rules were you can do what you want because she was a senior in high school. You can do what you want. But my biggest rule is you have to go to school and do your work. And so she actually got the freedom that she always claimed I kept from her because I was stricter because I was lied to all the time. Like constantly sneaking out, over the years, all this stuff. And this was before she ever got like into drugs hard. And
did she start with weed?
She told me, we actually had a conversation not that long ago. The problem is, I don't know if your daughter was ever like this. Is things I thought I knew, I find out the real story, or I guess what's the real story several years later. And so
absolutely.
And so I so she told me she actually took pain pills. And I said, where on earth did you find pain pills? And she's like, you. And I'm like, oh, because I don't like narcotics. So when I had dental work done or a surgery over the years, I'd hold on to them because I'm thinking you never know when you might need it. And so I wouldn't throw it away. And that's how, and I would forget about them.
And my daughter told me that because I would smell her breath when she came home, she was afraid to drink. So she just took pills.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, like, this is the insanity of this disease, right? Like, she knew that she was going to get caught because I'm sure you relate as the daughter of an alcoholic, your nose is so, I could smell alcohol on somebody's breath from like 50 paces, right? I can just smell. And then when it's coming out of somebody's pores, I can smell it like nobody's business. And she knew that. And then decided that the way to go instead was to, befriend a boy that, that could get her pills. And that's how it started. And then once he crossed over into heroin because of cost and availability and all this other nonsense was when she sort of crossed over with him. But the lying, I didn't trust anything she said for years even after she got clean. And she does call it getting clean. And I listened to your other episodes this weekend, and I know that you got some flack for saying addict. So my daughter's sort of very old school, right? So she calls herself an addict, just like your daughter had said. There's, that's not like such an egregious word. And she does say clean, not sober, because and I don't know if you know that that's like the newest thing is shouldn't say quote unquote clean.
Because it insinuates like, you're dirty. That's the whole thing.
Dirty, yes, that you used to be dirty. Yes. Well, and for her, that was sort of her journey through Narcotics Anonymous was you were clean, you had clean time, and you were an addict. So she does sort of still prescribes to all of those, I don't know if it's old school, but prescribes to all of those old terminology sort of things. But when you talk about a 360-degree shift in a person, and this is what I try and say to the families, it is possible. They have to want it more than they want the substance. And they have to take the steps in order to make themselves better. Because when I tell you that She is vegan. She does not use plastic. She does not have a microwave. She does not eat anything that is not organic. I mean, it was, and I mean, she has said herself that she has shot up with puddle water in a bottle cap, right? And she went from that to, this life that she's living now. And it's like the only thing, I mean, I would have never believed it if you had said to me, 11 years ago that this is where she would be on the other side of this. I would have never believed it because she was sort of that deep into it and really had no regard for her own life. I mean, she had no value and no thought of consequences of this, what was going to happen to her. She had none. And then she got one day and held on to it ever since.
I was wondering, as far as, has she spoke to you about like what her aha moment was when she decided she was done?
She did. So it's a crazy story. How I found out, because I was clueless. She came home and she told me that somebody she knew and that she went to high school with had died. And I said, how did he die? And she said, he died of a drug overdose. And little did I know that she was with him. Then she left his house and he died hours later.
Wow.
And you would think, wow, that would be somebody's rock bottom or aha moment, whatever you want to call it. And sadly enough, it was not. It was 6 years later when she was in treatment in upstate Pennsylvania and somebody snuck her in drugs in a shampoo bottle. She got high in the treatment center, and then her roommate was a 40-year-old alcoholic woman. And I know for my mom, she was, her looks were a little ravaged by, the age of 40 or 50, just because she was a hard whiskey drinker. And this woman was 40. She was my daughter's roommate. And my daughter was sitting on her bed in the treatment center, high, not like having gotten away with bringing drugs into the treatment center. And my daughter's very vain and stunningly gorgeous. And she looked at this woman and she said to herself, this is not what I want to look like at 40. And she decided then and there that she was done with heroin. And that's a wild way to be done with heroin, considering all of the damage that was done between day one and 6 years later in active addiction.
It really is. That's not what you would think would be her moment. That's interesting.
No,
I think it comes down to like one day they're ready. The more I've thought about it and all the people I've interacted with, because we've done this treatment thing so many times, but there's so many people I've interacted with through TikTok who have told me that they never went to treatment. They were done one day. They got sober in their mom's bathroom and they never looked back.
And that really goes to, there's no one right way, right? There's just no one prescribed way. And I think, so the group that I talk to in person, many of them are multiple times in treatment. And when I ask them, did you think you could use or drink responsibly, or did you get a case of the fuck-its, right? So those are typically the two reasons that people relapse. And multiple times people have said, I thought I had it. I thought I didn't need any sort of support on the outside. And I did not remember the power of the mental obsession. So the mental obsession that drives you to call somebody that has drugs, or drive to the liquor store, or sort of go out there in secret and get what you need. I think that mental obsession, sometimes people have that, and maybe there are some people that never pick it up again because they either don't have it anymore, or they never really had it, but they were so deep in that they couldn't get out of it. I've lived, so you know how you go to what you know, right? So I've lived with a couple alcoholics / dry drunks myself personally, because we try and recreate our childhood and heal it as adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, we go towards chaos if we know that chaos is where we're comfortable. And I have both of those things, right? I grew up in a very chaotic childhood, and I just kept going to that in romantic relationships. So I've been exposed to a couple dry alcoholics, and they are the angriest people with hair trigger tempers that never really dealt with this. So they just sort of go through every day without a lot of joy or happiness. And under the surface, their sort of go-to emotion is anger. And I didn't realize that. Like, one relationship I was in for 5 years, and this guy, I mean, he was so angry. Any little thing, like you put you know, load the dishwasher wrong, and this guy would freak out. And of course, after I left him, he went to treatment because of a DUI, actually multiple DUIs, and got himself into a place where he was pursuing a 12-step program, and now has not been for a few years, but is still not drinking. So I think it's so dependent on the individual. The sort of complex thing now is the fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
And because nothing that's on the street now is heroin anymore. And that's where it's so frightening for people that are still out there now.
I agree. And that's why I've learned a lot more about harm reduction and how important it is, because so many people are dying from fentanyl overdose and poisoning. And it's the whole goal with harm reduction, as I'm sure you know, is it's to keep them alive long enough for them to reach the point when they are ready to get sober. And it's scary times.
Yeah. And the whole, I forget, I'm not sure if it's Sweden or Norway, one of the countries, European countries that has harm reduction, the number of people with substance use disorder that are actively using, once they started offering harm reduction, and another very controversial topic of the safe injection sites,
Mm-hmm.
they went, the instances of people dying and of people wanting to get treatment changed so much based on those two things, right? And the stigma of MAT and medicated assisted treatment needs to be whatever is going to keep your loved one alive, right? It needs
Mm-hmm.
to stop being like you're weak or you're not able to be completely abstinent or what have you. I mean, if it's going to stop people from dying, and I mean, when we talk about COVID, right, we paid a whole lot of attention to that, and more people die of overdoses a day than died of COVID. And we never talked about it, and it's been going on for years.
Yeah, the stigma it's horrible, and as we discussed earlier, I mean, that's what's keeping families quiet and not wanting to speak about it. But then on the flip side, you also have people who are in recovery that I have been attacked so many times online that have told me, you're not allowed to talk about this. This is her story. And it's like, well, it's my story too. And people don't realize there's a lot I do not tell out of respect for my daughter.
Of course.
And I mean, if I wanted views, if I wanted all of that, I could make it very juicy and share all kinds of things that people would just want to hear nonstop. But that's not what I'm about. And I really try to humanize the people who are struggling with addiction. And it's brutal sometimes because people need to feel less alone. I think people in recovery and active use, they need to see what families are going through. Because I probably get more private messages from people who are in recovery or in active use that have said how much my videos help them. And that was something I had never really expected, because I went into it really just trying to, one, build a community for myself, and then, allow family members to feel less alone and talk openly and feel comfortable talking openly and creating dialogue.
Well, and that's the thing. People do feel alone. And I'll tell you, when I went to Narnan, I went in, I had a notebook, I had a pen, I was there early. It was in a hospital conference room. And I was like, oh my gosh, finally I'm going to get some answers. And they were like, no crosstalk, no advice, let her, release her with love. And when our meetings, which are 3 nights a week available, through these treatment centers that hire us, we do offer advice based on our own experience. And everybody, when they come to the first meeting, almost everybody is like crying. And we've had people come 3 nights a week for a year. I mean, imagine the commitment to, I think I'm a little bit interesting, but imagine how interesting you must think I am to come 3 nights a week for an entire year to hear me talk, right? Mm-hmm. But it's for the newcomer where they're able to say, I had no idea that there are 40 other families just on this one meeting. And we don't just say, well, we're not going to offer any advice. Because people do need that sort of, this is what I would suggest, because the things that people are doing in the name of love is crazy. We have a mom that is overdrawn on her bank account, that her credit cards are maxed out, that she has taken all the money out of her retirement. And it's not for treatment centers. This is for new tires, car accidents, rent, food. And she's sort of, we call it a pillow chucker, right? So her daughter is not uncomfortable because mom keeps coming in with the Superman cape on saying, I'm going to save the day. And then the girl is, sober for 2 weeks and relapses. And now, rent is paid for another month. It's hard to set a boundary. It's hard to recognize manipulation because our loved ones, my daughter was a master manipulator. I can remember driving to this guy's house with $40 because she told me she was taking him to dinner to thank him for helping her move in a driving rainstorm, and they were not going anywhere. This was for heroin. And she really never made a standard sort of typical amends to me. And I had to stop looking for it, right? I had to stop waiting for it. I had to stop wishing for it. Her deeds and actions now, how she lives her life, really, I have to sort of be at peace with that being enough, because I don't think she realizes how much she hurt me and the damage that she caused. People that she knew stole my car out of my driveway. I threatened to kill a drug dealer. I almost drove my car off the roof of a parking garage because the pain is so unbearable. And I heard you say on another episode about the sleeping, right? I would go to sleep, but I couldn't stay asleep. And when I woke up, I was, it was everything that I didn't do right. What should I have said? What can I do tomorrow? All this strategizing. So it was like this little bit of sleep and then up, for the rest of the night. So that really spoke to me. And the other thing that you said that I wanted to mention was the phone anxiety, right? So I talk about the phone anxiety, and I'm actually speaking about it tomorrow night in a meeting. Present traumatic stress disorder, right? So we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and we talk about it as it relates to the military or things like sexual assault or abuse or homelessness, things like that. Present traumatic stress disorder is things that are currently going on, and we don't realize how badly they are impacting us. And when you said the phone anxiety, almost every loved one in our meetings, because the meetings aren't specifically just for parents, right? So brothers, sisters, partners, all the things. And anxiety is so real. I swear that for years, it never left my hand. And then just like you, the number would pop up and I would think, oh my God, is today the day, right? It's the worst. And now, years later, people always say to me, like, is it different? Did it get better? It did get better, right? It got a lot better because she showed with deeds and actions, right? That she was committed to this process, right? And again, no one right way. She is abstinent. Her significant other is abstinent. They live the life of Narcotics Anonymous. Doesn't work for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really where the disconnect is. And maybe even with some of the people that follow you is they sort of get riled up when you say certain things because they really believe in what worked for them without recognizing how complex people are and that one thing doesn't work for everybody.
No, I agree. I actually talked about this the other night. I went briefly on live at like 1 a.m. and I had quite a bit of people in there. I was surprised. I was talking about boundaries. I had a lot of family members that were in there and they admitted that they were enabling. And then I had people who were in recovery commenting about how their family, they haven't been able to get trust back. And something I've learned in my advice is when people are in active use, they lie, they manipulate. So it gets to a point where words no longer matter. And
Exactly.
And I tell them, I said, my advice to you is you got to stop with the words. You have to walk the walk. The longer you walk walk and show how you're living your life in a different way, and they will notice. And maybe eventually, as time goes on, you can have those conversations, but it's going to take a long time. You have to, show with action. And I think families who have been through it, loved ones, that's so important. Is I just want to see you, live a healthy life. And
if you're not following any sort of plan, right? You are just home and you are sitting in front of the television and you are not working and you're not moving forward and you're not making connections and you're not reading about it or any sort of, forward movement. You just came home from treatment and you're hoping for the best. The families are still going to be worried because they are future tripping and they are writing the relapse. And you said that on an episode that you were just on pins and needles when she was clean, just thinking, oh my gosh, is today the day that she relapses? And I hear that every day from these families. And it does get easier with time. It also depends on sort of how much communication is happening, because with my daughter, I wasn't the person, it took me a little while to get there, but eventually I stopped saying, did you go to a meeting today? How many days do you have? Who spoke? How long were you there? Who did you sit with? What was the topic? Did you do a 12-step? Like, I stopped helicoptering, but it took a long time. I can remember, so she lives in Florida now, and she came home. I live in New Jersey, and there was, we have soft pretzels with, sea salt on them. And she had eaten the soft pretzel, and on this table was the remnants of the pieces of salt. And I didn't see the pretzel. So in my mind, I was like, oh my God, this is crack, because I'm crazy. Right. And I'm like, oh my God, now you're doing crack. Like, and she was like, Mom, it's pretzel salt. I just had this salt. And she was clean for a while. And she was like, you're crazy. And she packed up all her stuff and went to a friend's house. And like, I know that's resonating with you on some level.
Oh,
right?
it is. It is.
Your mind just goes from 0 to 60. And because I was so sick, because the idea that there was something in my life that I could not control, I couldn't accept it, right? Firstborn, alpha personality, adult child of an alcoholic. I thought that I could outthink this and buy sobriety. So I thought brains and money were going to fix this. I had a little bit of money, I had a little bit of brains. I was going to outsmart addiction. Little did I know that neither one of those things were going to be what finally worked for her. Right. So I just kept trying, and I just kept throwing more money at it and going bankrupt and throwing more money at it and getting sicker and sicker myself. And now when I talk to families, so I also offer this one-on-one coaching for families, and people will come and they'll say things and I'll call them out on this bullshit. And they'll be like, well, the reason that Johnny's not in sober living is because there's not one near my house. And I'll be like, well, tell me why Johnny needs to be near your house. And they'll be like, because I just want him nearby. I feel better. And I'm like, well, no. Johnny, if Johnny wants to go to sober living, the fact that there's not one in your tiny town in Alabama should not be the reason that he's not in sober living. But the first question you need to ask yourself is, does Johnny want to be in sober living? Because the first 5 or 6 times my daughter went to treatment, she did not want to be there. Like she was, I was like, okay, you're 16 and you're a hot mess and you're going to treatment. And that didn't work either. So it was just, that crazy turnaround. But childhood trauma, right, and I know you spoke about that. Childhood trauma was a big thing. She watched men sort of rotate in and out of my life. She was, we moved right before her freshman year of high school. So she did not have that traditional like experience where she stayed in one house. I was like convinced that was why she was an addict. Again, crazy thoughts that go through your mind in the middle of the night. And then this sort of DNA / hereditary, her dad became an alcoholic, weirdly enough, at like the age of 50. Both grandparents on both sides were alcoholics. So it was almost like inevitable, right? I mean, it's crazy how those two things, right? The trauma and the hereditary sort of bring you to this place. And then when we tie in mental illness, right? Mental health challenges, that adds another layer of let me self-medicate rather than take this medication regime.
No, definitely. It's
crazy, right?
It really is. My daughter, the first time that she went to treatment in Boise, their recommendation was she move into sober living, and I was fine with her staying down there, and she wanted to stay down there at the time. I believe, she really wanted to get sober, and she was riding that pink cloud, which I later learned about. And and she was in the sober living, I think a month, and then she got kicked out. And I can't even remember the reason why. It was all their fault, of course. Later, like I said, finding out things years later, because we ended up, we let her come back up to Coeur d'Alene and live with us. And she seemed really good. Like she went out and she got a good job. She was driving, and it really seemed like things had turned around until it didn't. And so I later on, actually, this last time that she had been home, we talked about that time, and she told me she was using the whole time. And that was
my daughter, she was with a therapist for a brief amount of time. She was going to an outpatient program, and then later told me she was using the whole time as well. Because they are master. And my daughter would gaslight me, right? So I would see something, like I remember seeing a needle mark on her arm and bringing it up to her, and her saying, this is an old needle mark and you're just making me feel worse. And I can't believe that you can't tell that this is, old. It was fresh. It was from that day. But you want to believe them so badly that you're just like, okay. Another time I went into her room in her dad's house, and there was a belt cinched where she would have just had used the belt. And nope, not, that wasn't the case either. And just like when you think about like the trauma that even now talking about this, like, I don't know, like if your heart rate is like racing like mine, but like it is trauma that just stays with you.
Oh, it does. I've gotten better this last go around because I really had to kind of take a step back, and because I used to focus on Facebook Messenger. I wouldn't necessarily communicate with her because that was a boundary of mine. Occasionally, like maybe monthly, I'd send her a text just letting her know, hey, I love you. I'm here for you when you're ready to get sober. That was kind of how I would leave it. But
Right.
I would look daily, if not multiple times a day, to see if that green dot was present, knowing that she was active and alive. And that can consume you. You don't realize it, but it does. It makes it a constant thought in your head. And so I've really taken a step back, and I have not done that since I had asked her actually to leave, which was March 2nd. And it's been good for me. I don't, occasionally it'll hit me out of nowhere, and I'll just kind of like my eyes will fill up with tears, and I feel like my heart drops. But I've just been, I have a therapist that I've been working through shit with, and looking into getting to EMDR. And I'm just trying to stay busy and do things I enjoy. But for sure, especially before, it would consume me.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of weird because I do work in this space, and I do try and support these families, and I really try and focus on what they're going through rather than sort of going back to what happened to me. But it is such an imprint on my memories, and it just left such a mark on me personally that it's really hard. And I'm really proud of you that you were able to step back with her, because you could see on your videos how worried you were and how much you wanted this for her. And it's sad because we can't want it for them more than they want it for themselves.
Correct.
And I just, my heart would go out to you when I saw your videos, where I saw, you were so hopeful at times, and you were so committed to her recovery and her success. And it's hard to let that go and think like, okay, I'm just going to step back. I mean, I know how hard that is.
Mm-hmm. No, it is, because, in her situation, it's one of those things. It's like, am I being manipulated, or is this the time? Like, how am I going to know if it's the time? Like, when she really, really does want sobriety, it's like, I can't help but feel like she probably does want sobriety, maybe at that moment, but she'll say, she's sick and tired of being sick and tired. But how much of that is manipulation, tactics being used? Because clearly she's not sick and tired of being sick and tired. And she, I know for sure, is addicted to the lifestyle. She likes living out on the streets. And I can usually obviously tell a relapse is coming. I'll start getting that feeling, and just patterns. Mm-hmm. We all can. You learn when you've been through this enough, the patterns, and you hope it's like, they're going to fall, take a few steps back sometimes, but you hope they're going to get back on track and move forward. And I wish that I could share more as to what led to me asking her to leave. As far as I know, it didn't have to do with a relapse this last go around, but there's more as time has gone by and I've taken a step back. I have started questioning if she had in fact relapsed. And just with more things that I've discovered, it's tough. And my objective, I always say, me having her leave, it gets easier. I've told families this. When you create your boundaries and you after you have to, put them into action, it gets easier each time. Like, I have had my daughter leave many times, and because she does, I don't pay for a phone. That's just something I've never done for her, because the girl can somehow get a hold of a prepaid phone in less than 24 hours, and Wi-Fi is everywhere. She rarely ever goes without a phone. So I have never paid for a phone for her. And then I look at it as, I could have my daughter die in my house, or she could die on the streets. The outcome could be the same, but I'm trying to prevent the collateral damage. And that's kind of where the name of this podcast came from, is I'm trying to protect my other children. I don't want them to find her
Absolutely.
overdosed in my house. I don't want my grandson to find his mom dead. And so I don't want to cause additional trauma to these innocent, children. And I had to pick and make that decision. And that was just a very clear boundary for me.
Well, it's really choosing the people that are impacted and of no choice of their own, right? So your other children and your husband and your grandson are impacted without really a choice in the matter. And if you can protect their psyche in any way by separating them from this while she figures it out, and hopefully she will figure it out, because I don't think that they're excited about using anymore when it comes to that point, right? It's just they're staving off being sick, right? They're not getting high anymore. It's just this sense of normalcy. And I hear that from many, many people, that it is no longer enjoyable. It's just to stave off being sick, right? Because the idea of being sick, and I know she was on Matt, right?
Yes. She originally, the first few times, she was very... she wanted to do abstinence. And I think a lot of that came from me I worked in the ER. All I ever saw was people in the ER who abused MAT. And so I was kind of against it. At the time, I felt like people were, substituting one drug for another. I've learned a lot actually through TikTok and people who have been on MAT, and to where I'm very supportive of it. And I actually encouraged her finally, after multiple treatment centers, to consider doing it. And she did. And she had 8 months of sobriety a couple years ago while being on MAT. And I mean, I felt like I had my daughter back even on that. And I think the stigma surrounding that, people really need to let that go, because there's too many people who they get guilt tripped for being on it, and then they force themselves to wean off of it. And next thing you know, they overdose and die. I hear these stories all the time. But Matt was good for her.
Yeah. And I think it really depends on which, what you're on as well, because there are definitely people that abuse Suboxone, and, new things are coming out every day. But I mean, if we don't get to sort of the reason behind the numbing, right? Like, was she not interested in a 12-step program at all?
It's so hard to say. Like she wasn't, she never made, obviously she never made it through all the steps. Each facility she went to, the focus was 12 steps. And I don't really know. I've never forced her to talk to me about things. I kind of have always made it to where when she wants to talk, we talk about it. And she didn't seek out, 12-step meetings on her own. And that's something that I think, was key and lacking. And she would look for comfort and love and needing male attention. That's something she's always really needed. And it just comes from trauma when she was younger. And she doesn't know how to be single and work on herself. And there's a lot of people like that. I mean, there's a lot of adults who aren't addicts that are like that. Sometimes being alone is terrifying. I went through that period, but no, she would not actively. Usually I'd be like, I'd be like, well, do you want to do a meeting? I can log in and us do it together and sit with you. Cause I had not done one before. And so I had done a few with her. But she had started therapy. So there were things we were trying to get her into the different therapy modalities, because trauma therapy seemed to work really well for her. But I don't know. I have so many questions now that I think ultimately for her, and it's all individualized, each addict is so different. I think for her, next time, if she wants treatment, I'm going to make her call the places and find it.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's, my daughter never ended up doing that because I was such a crazy person. But, as far as the need for the sober community or clean community, she was very resistant to a 12-step program in the beginning, and then would come home and ultimately relapse because there was no tools in her tool belt for how to handle life's challenges without the need for drugs. So I think what the being in a 12-step program and having this sponsor who she went through 3 or 4 sponsors and 3 or 4 home groups, but when she ultimately got this person, she doesn't make a move without and I don't mean I mean a serious, complicated situation. Her first call is her sponsor so that they can talk it through. And it's almost like, oh my gosh, like, does everybody in the world need a sponsor, to like have a person that they talk through things with no judgment, right? Because I can remember somebody from a lifelong friend of mine told me that, and I was one of the first people that I told that this was going on in my life. And she told me that the reason my daughter shot heroin was because I wasn't a stay-at-home mom. So it's like you finally get up the courage to tell somebody, and they say, well, maybe if you didn't have to have a job, this would not have happened. And we don't speak anymore. But like that sense of judgment is, if you have the right sponsor, you don't have that judgmental relationship. And she was slow in getting into that 12-step community. I always worry about the people that I deal with once a week online or in person, where they're saying, it's not for me. I can't connect with the spiritual aspect. And I say, the spiritual aspect could be anything, right? So there was one guy that said that he worshiped this big tree in the house where he grew up. And when he talks about the God of his understanding, he somehow connects it with the tree. And I'm like, listen, if that keeps you off heroin, I'm all for the tree. Like, tree it up, dude. Like, whatever it is, And other people say, oh my gosh, it's just old people that are there and people are getting high in the meetings and I can't pay attention. I'm like, well, then just keep trying at a different meeting. Because even if you get one little crumb from it, maybe it'll, take you to tomorrow, just like one day at a time. I want to read you something, if that's okay.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
It's pretty short. And you may have heard this already. It says, a message from an addict to their loved one. If you really want to help me, go to a meeting. Learn all you can about my addiction. Learn to say no and set boundaries with me. I won't like it. I may yell at you, but do it anyway. Know that addiction has hijacked my thinking. I'm not myself right now. I need you to act in my best interest until I can. Please be strong. Don't give in to me. Reach out for support. You're the best chance I have. Anonymous.
I think that's a great information for families.
Yeah, it's tough.
It is. It is tough. And I'm curious as to, because I'm sure you've read some of the research, your thoughts on the studies that are being done in regards to psychedelics and PTSD, and if you think they potentially have a role when it comes to addiction therapies.
My son-in-law asked me that question the other day, and he's been clean 14 years. And I said, I think it's going to take some time and some success before we're able to sort of say, yes, this is going to work. And yes, this is, the next step. But I'm encouraged by us trying something, because for years we tried nothing. Like
exactly.
There's years where there's absolutely nothing, right? So let's try something rather than just sit back and go, wow, this is really a problem. So we need to start somewhere.
Yeah, and sadly, it's going to take, I think, the right politician or, bigwig who has one of their children overdose and die from it before you really start to see more call to action. I think there's just so much stigma, and people just aren't, talking out loud about it. And there needs to be more education in schools. There needs to be more education in the medical system and how patients are treated that come in. that are addicted to where you can just tell that there's this stigma. And I can relate to that. I mean, I did ER
Oh, it's
nursing.
horrible.
It is. I did
Oh
ER
my God,
nursing.
so did I.
and
I mean,
you
we've
get,
had
yeah.
so many parallels, you and I, in our life. I don't know if you remember me messaging you about how many things are parallel
Yes.
in our lives. And yeah, the compassion fatigue amongst the medical community, I mean, it would make me sick. And I would think, like, I would feel it like coming up, like the anger, like the Irish, like anger rising inside me when people would be like, they're back again, drug seeking again, overdosed again. And I would be like, this is somebody's child, partner, parent, you know, these are people. And, you know, there were people, there's a local hospital here where they would say that they would Narcan them. The person would run out the door, get high in the parking lot, and have to be brought right back in. So, like, what? Of course, there's going to be compassion fatigue, right? But I think at that point, the leadership of the medical community needs to say, well, recognize it, and maybe that's the time that you have to move on past bedside, right? Because there's a million ways to be a medical person, whether you're a provider, whether you're a nurse, whether you're an MD, a nurse practitioner. There's a lot of ways to be in a role that's not bedside, where you are. I mean, there's the hospitals here locally, there's no plan for somebody that's in the ER and they're withdrawing. They don't want to provide Suboxone because there's no follow-up in the community. So they AMA because they're so uncomfortable.
Yes, and actually, yeah. Well, in my county, one of the things they implemented was now they have someone come in to the local hospital in the ED. I think that comes in as an overdose, and they will give them resources. I think at that point they can be started on Suboxone, or you can't do it right away. So I'm not exactly sure how they do that, because I would think they would know not to give it within, the first 24 hours. But
right.
And I said, well, where's the follow up? Because
exactly.
I mean, apparently there is now a place locally. I need to reach out and talk to them to get more information on it, to where I think they offer sliding scale, because there was nothing. I'm in a pretty rural county here in Florida, and there was just, you had to travel everywhere to get any type of assistance. But the physicians that would provide it, they wouldn't take insurance. They wouldn't do sliding scale. And I had an office, because I argued with them trying to find somebody to prescribe Suboxone to my daughter. They're like, no, we charge, it was like $400 a visit. And I'm like, she has insurance.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, oh, we don't take insurance for that, because they know people will pay for it. And they get cash for it. It's a money maker. And you have, unfortunately, people in all areas of medicine that, try to take advantage of people when they can.
I mean,
go ahead.
I remember when we were looking into Vivitrol for my daughter, and I can't even remember. The first visit was $600, and then the shot was this amount, no insurance, and I mean, it was just crazy. And you want they're preying on people, but yet, and again, like, not to get political, but how did we get the COVID vaccine was free for everybody, right? And not that it should be either or, but if we're talking about harm prevention, how is this allowed to be so expensive? Because even the over-the-counter Narcan is $50, I believe, and many people can't afford that. It's just this, we could talk about this forever and there would be no resolution, because the right people are not, like you said, that they're not committed to the outcome being that this is somehow managed. You can't look at anything on TV, movie, show, anything where alcohol is not front and center. And they just legalized marijuana here where I live, and you go by somebody's car and they're getting high while driving. And it's wild to me. And I'll say to my my nursing students that because they all think that this is legalization is like the best thing ever, and I said, okay, raise your hand if you want, if it's okay that your bartender or your Starbucks barista is, smoked weed before work, and they're like, yeah, that's okay. I said, okay, so it's okay that your Uber driver's high, and they're like, well, no. I'm like, okay, well, is it okay that your surgeon or your airplane pilot's high? And they're like, absolutely not. I'm like, okay, so where's the line, right? I mean, is it legal in Florida, weed?
It is. Yes, you can get your medicinal card, and so that now they have the places popping up everywhere.
What do you think about that?
I don't know. It's one of those things. Marijuana, I never really was a fan of. I smoked a lot in high school, but it just made me sleepy. I think there's a place. I think there's a place for it when it comes to like medicine and cancer and things like that. I worry though about our youth because they have proven in the studies that it does basically stunt and cause, their brain growth and whatnot. If they start smoking marijuana in high school, which they all are doing, and now it's even more accessible, I think. I don't know. Me being a healthcare provider, I can't get a medicinal card anyways, nor would I try.
Right.
It's just my husband's never been into it. I don't know. Some people swear like Cali sober is what works for them. It comes back to my view sometimes of replacing one drug with another. And we know that you can transfer your addiction. I mean, it's even with food. Like I had gastric sleeve, and a lot of people were like, you need to watch, because I do drink alcohol, because many people who have gastric sleeve or bypass become alcoholics because they transfer that food addiction to alcoholism
or to shopping
or to shopping,
all different kind of things. But I think as far as like, and a lot of people, say that their plan after detox is weed and weed alone. And I'm like, well, so here's the thing with your brain is your brain gets the weed and your brain thinks this is not what I want. What I want is meth or heroin or crack. And it just forces you to have these thoughts where you think, well, I'm just going to do it once, or I can now do it responsibly, because weed has sort of changed your ability to think as clearly as you potentially could without it. And that's just been, and many of them will say to me, oh, that's just nonsense. And I'm like, well, how did that work for you before? Here you are in treatment, where you thought just a little bit of weed was going to be fine. And then, 3 days later, you were, using your drug of choice because your brain was not, content with just the weed, because it's the addict brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the addict brain cannot just have a little of anything, right? And many people will say to me, when I have a meeting, I'll say, raise your hand if you have a family history of addiction. And the people that don't, I say, can I dig a little deeper? And they'll say, sure. And I said, did grandma have, 600 Hummel figurines? Or did grandpa have, 10 cars out in the yard? Or collect all of the magazines and the mail? And, were they at buying scratch offs or at the casino? Or, did they have 300 baseball hats? Like that is all sort of mental obsession. And most people go, oh yeah, grandma had, when she died, there was like bottles of alcohol under her bed, or, we had to clean out the house of, 20 years worth of collected stuff. And she was, $100,000 in debt from tchotchkes. And people, it's widely accepted. So we don't think of it as addiction. Just like when we see somebody that's 400 pounds, we don't think like, oh, that's food addiction. We just think, they've like lost a little bit of control over their carbs or their junk food or whatever. It's addiction. Mm-hmm. And it's so rampant. But when we see IV drug use, we think, oh, this is shocking. It's awful. It's dirty. It's shameful. But yet, we see somebody, you working in the ER, I know you've seen it too. I've seen guys where they come in on the back of a fire truck because they can't get them in an ambulance because they're 600 or 700 pounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going, oh my God, this is an addict, but it is.
It is. That food gives them a release of dopamine, which is what,
Exactly.
and that's what it comes, shopping is the same way. It releases dopamine.
Yeah.
And I do, when it comes to marijuana, it's, in particular with my daughter, I do believe it was a gateway drug. I know she said pills she had started with, but she always felt like, oh, I can smoke pot. And I just feel that for certain people, it is a gateway drug because they get that feeling of escape, and that's
Absolutely.
addicting to them. And then they, and then their friend offers, oh, well, try this. If you like that, try this. And it just
right. And
gets out of hand.
If this is good, if one is good, more must be better. Right.
Exactly.
And it was that same thing where she had no regard for her own health, for, the doing something to excess, for, this may kill you. None of it mattered. None of those things were of shock value to her. And for many people, they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to do these risky behaviors because something could happen to me. That was not built inside of her for some reason. So the risky behaviors where for other people, they would shy away from them, she ran towards them.
Mm-hmm.
And, she does not have a mental health diagnosis. But if you sort of add that on for people that have the mental health diagnosis, they're just trying to feel quote unquote normal by smoking a little weed, which will make them a little less anxious, and they'll be able to talk to people a little more freely with drugs, alcohol, weed. I've never seen more anxious people than people in their, young adolescents in their 20s, in their 30s. I've never seen a more adolescent population of people that were so socially awkward and anxious. But now it's like, good luck finding a therapist, because my sister-in-law was trying to find one for my nephew, and there is no one that has an opening for months. And if anybody wants to wait months for a therapist, do they really? I mean, therapy, when you finally come to the point where you want and need it, you need to get it right away. And it's crazy. You try and look in network. I mean, and it's the mental health system in this country is beyond broken. I mean,
yes.
It is just beyond broken, because people are being prescribed medication for different mental illnesses by their primary, who has no experience in mental health and is not connecting them with somebody to talk about what they're going through. They're just saying, here, take this pill, right? And then, we're getting people that, many people that I see, they're coming off of that medicine because they don't like the side effects, and then they end up relapsing on their drug of choice because they could not sustain the time on their mental health medication.
Mm-hmm. No, I ended up because, and I have hospital insurance, and those who maybe don't know, hospital insurance is like the worst insurance. You would think we'd have really good insurance, but at least in Florida, it's horrible. And I have to
That's a shame.
I have to pay out of pocket for my therapy. So I pay $125 for every visit, and because I can't find a therapist that takes my insurance.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, and, you are taking care of other people, and we want people like you to be as healthy as possible, mentally and physically as healthy as possible.
It is. And some states are definitely better than others, I feel like. I don't know how New Jersey is. Florida is, I think, one of the worst states. Even if you're on Medicaid, it just doesn't cover anything. And whereas I've heard Ohio has really good addiction benefits. When I lived out in Idaho, my husband worked for a power company, and then the hospital I worked for, we just did dual coverage. But I found there were tons of therapists, which the suicide rate is really high out there also, but there were tons of psychiatrists, therapists. There were actual addiction counselors. My daughter at one time, she was in high school and she was living out there. She had an addiction counselor, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist. And then I eventually added in
Wow.
trauma therapy, and I was only having to pay $25 copays. And so I was able to do all of that. And she still ended up going into hard drugs. But it just, the difference in insurance, I can't find anybody who takes insurance down here for me to even find a therapist.
Yeah, and I actually did found somebody online, and it was a great experience. I can't even remember how I found her, but she didn't take insurance either. But at least sort of the draw was that it was a Zoom meeting.
That's how I do
so
mine.
I felt.
Yep.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I can't recommend the therapy enough, whether you are the family member or the person in recovery, because you need to sort of, it's not about the alcohol or the drug, right? It's about the underlying need for numbing, and how you get through that is to, do that inner child work and do the shadow work and the sound baths and the brain mapping and all that business, to try and heal yourself from the inside out rather than the other way. Right.
Mm-hmm. I am curious. Do you have, I many times will get family members of teenagers. So, they can't just ask them to leave the house. The boundaries are different at that point. That ask me, what would you have done differently? And I'm like, I think I did everything right. I had her an addiction therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I tried, and I still was unable to prevent the inevitable. And I made a lot of mistakes as a parent, but and our relationship was strained for a very long time. But when it came to trying to be proactive, I feel like I did a lot of the right things. But do you have any advice for those who have teenagers that are, say, they know they're smoking pot, or they fear they're heading down that path of addiction?
Yeah, it's the instinct is to hold on tighter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, in my experience, backfires, because I did all that, right? So I took away the car, I took away the access to money, I monitored her phone, I followed her, I did all these things. And at the end of the day, she was going to do what she was going to do regardless. I think early intervention in a program, I'm a huge fan of these like sort of wilderness experiences. And these places that are out in the middle of nowhere. And even if it's just for like an intensive weekend, or if it's for, a week-long experience of, or getting them in touch with a role model informally, right? So, somebody that you can trust, somebody that's in your community that you can connect them with, or, going to a meeting, whether it be online or in person, an open AA or NA meeting, just to hear a speaker, right? To say like, they started in the same place you did, right? And this is where it ended up. But at the end of the day, honestly, it's so sad to say that I really believe that we can't prevent what their choices are going to be. And it's so sad to reconcile the fact that I did everything wrong. I don't think I did anything right, as far as like, all I did was threaten her.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept being consequence based. And all that made her do was rebel more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you are a beautiful girl in this space, you don't need money, right? Because you're going to like do whatever you have to do to get whatever it is you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? So everybody can fill in the blanks with what and think your worst thoughts, because that's pretty much what happens. And I honestly, I know of a guy whose daughter was pregnant, 9 months pregnant. She was 17, locked in a bedroom in his house. She somehow got someone to bring heroin to the house in the middle of the night, took a tube sock, with a rock inside of it to weigh it down, and threw the heroin into the bedroom window.
Oh, wow.
I know somebody else, a therapist that I work with, who again keeps attracting people in active addiction. She knew that her partner was going out to get drugs, threw herself on the ground and faked a seizure. And he walked right over her body and left the house. Like,
Wow.
that's the power of addiction. Like, somebody said to me the other day, addiction is taking a laxative, and once it gets through your system, don't shit. I was like, okay. And I was so shook by him saying that. And he's from the Caribbean, and he's since relapsed. And he's such an amazing guy. And I was like, I've used that analogy over and over again, because everybody, has some sort of, familiarity with, diarrhea. And it's like, you have an episode of diarrhea, don't go. That's what it's like to have addiction, where the mental obsession or the need drives you and there's no way to stop it. And I was like, okay, I get it now. Like mind blowing, right?
It really is. That's a great analogy.
Yeah. I can't take any credit for it, but I thought it was a great analogy too. And honestly, I feel like for many of these younger kids, but not sort of in the beginning, right? But as they sort of progress down this path, if they're open to a place like Teen Challenge, which is no longer just for teens,
Yes.
or some of these other wilderness programs that are a year long, right? But it's only going to change your life if you want to change your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. Like, if you don't want to change your life, first of all, you're going to AMA. And second of all, you're going to AMA, thousands of miles away from your family. Right. So, it's like, we can only do what we can do.
I do think, just the more I've thought about, because growing up, I had DARE, right? Drug awareness, resistance, education. And and clearly it failed. And it's all these different programs is, I think it's kind of the education system needs to be educating teens on harm reduction, about Narcan, because there's so many, oh my gosh. And we're in a rural area. My daughter tells me all the time, all the drugs that are being used in the bathrooms at the high school. And many don't realize that you get a pill on the street, it's probably not a Xanax, or if it is a Xanax, it's cut with fentanyl. And you have, hear stories all the time of youth dying because they thought they were taking something else and they overdosed. And that's what I told my daughter, who's a senior, I said, whatever you do, I said, I know, like, you talk about you're not going to do any hard drugs. I'm like, don't even take a pill from somebody. I'm like, even if you think it's ibuprofen, go buy your own fucking ibuprofen.
Yeah. I mean, and it's wild because, there's a huge community here with like the edibles, right? Mm-hmm. And again, we're buying something that we have no clue what went into the makeup of it. And a friend of mine that works in a long-term mental health community, one of the residents there is a nurse, and he has been there for a year, and they can't snap him out of a psychosis induced by an edible.
Wow.
A year. And he's a nurse. And we've now normalized edibles, right? And everybody I know takes edibles. And I'm like, but it's not even like weed where you can see the plant, right? Mm-hmm. And believe me, weed was my daughter's gateway drug. So I am not a fan. If you have cancer, smoke all the weed you can, light it up. If you have, whatever mental or whatever physical ailment you need the weed for, I endorse it 1000%. But if you're just going to play around with it, again, like, where's the line? Because now in New Jersey, people think they can drive and get high, right? Because you can't drink a beer and drive, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't get it. But with the edibles, you just can't even see it. Like the weed, you can see that it's the plant. With the edibles, what's in the little thing? You have no idea. Just like you said about the pills, you have no idea. But yet people are just flocking to the places here locally to buy them. And somebody I know was like, oh, I just took that thing. And the person that gave him to him was like, you were just supposed to eat the foot off the bear, not the whole bear. And he was like, what? And he said he had convinced himself during the trip, or whatever you call it, that he was never going to be the same because he ate the whole bear. And he said he was like freaking out while he was experiencing it. And that's why I could never do a psychedelic. I would definitely be the person that like I would not survive it.
Because of the control, you feel like it would be hard to give up the control. Yes.
Yeah. And the idea, I mean, and that's the people that don't go with it. Like when they're on psychedelics is the people that start to freak out because they feel like they'll never be on the other side of it, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what country the study's being done in with the psychedelics and the people and the ayahuasca and the people waking up and saying they're no longer an addict. I mean, it's fascinating.
It is. I actually, if you haven't read it, I apparently there's I think a documentary on Netflix. I need to watch it. How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. He actually, I listen because I have a long car ride to work, to Audible, his book. And he talks a lot about the studies behind psychedelics and how that came into place. But what's interesting talking about the control, he describes one of the studies that was being done with the control group, basically them giving them guidance and steps that when they start to hallucinate and have their experience, that they're not going to want to give up that control and they're going to be terrified, but they have to let it go. And someone was telling their story, and that literally they described it as their whole body had disappeared like death. And all that was left was their left lower jaw. Okay. And they were holding on for dear life with that left lower jaw. That was it.
And my God, my worst nightmare.
And how, they remembered what they were told about just succumb to it, give up the control. And they did, as scared as they were, because they in their minds, they were going to die if they let go. And then it was like after that, like they were floating through heaven. And
wow.
And that's how they describe it. It's an interesting book. He talks about the different studies. He talks about ayahuasca and MDMA, psilocybin, all of that. I haven't finished it yet. But that one just stood out to me. I'm like, I can totally relate to that because obviously I'm a control freak. And I'm thinking that would be me. And I know with ayahuasca, they'll tell people you're going to see a unicorn on one side and a really scary demon on the other side. Walk towards the scary demon because that's how you're going to work through your shit.
Right. I mean, have you seen the Chelsea Handler? She filmed herself on it.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Oh, my God. And yes. So she was in, I forget what country, whether it be Ibiza or whatever, but she filmed herself and several other people. And I couldn't even imagine watching it did not make me want to use ayahuasca at all. Like, I think that her goal was to like provide this education and, you're going to be more open to it once you see this documentary. And I was like, you actually made me, I mean, not that it's just not the right path for me because I can't even imagine having that much lack of control. I mean, I'm a cheap drunk and really like, it's just not my thing, but you give me shoes or costume jewelry or, I mean, and I am all about it, but as far as that go, it's just not for me because I do fear consequences. And I think that's sort of the thing that sets me apart from my daughter, because even now she leads a very charmed life. They're very, very well off. She has a son, right? So I have a grandson that's almost 3. He's never flown coach in his life. They very frequently will travel on a private plane, right? Something I've never been able to do. And still, with this sort of very abundant life that she lives, she has no idea of consequences. Like, she'll leave her credit card somewhere, and it's that brain that really stopped functioning at the age of 15 or 16 and is still desperately trying to catch up. It's gotten much better, but she would move and not tell the post office she was leaving, and all the mail would go to the other house. Or she would leave her purse in her car and be surprised when she went back and it would be gone because she didn't lock the car. Or the credit card all over South Florida. I joke that if anybody finds a credit card in South Florida on the street, it probably belongs to her. I mean, and I'm just such the opposite. Like, I have a budget, and I, am very careful with where I put my credit card and my debit card, and I lock my car, and, I do regular maintenance on my car and all of these things. And when you mention, like, teaching in school, we go hard on algebra, but all these other life skills, we are by the wayside, right? We think that parents are teaching them, and they're not. But she very much is not a consequence-based mindset, where for me, I think of the consequences of everything.
Yes, that's probably why you do the same thing. That's why you probably became a nurse, I'm guessing, because I'm wondering how much of, I think a lot of us are like that.
Well, I had a 20-year mortgage career in mortgage management, got downsized when the market collapsed in 2008, and was volunteering at a hospital, and the nurses were the meanest bitches I'd ever seen to the patients. I was in the ER, and I was like, I bet you I could do this with some compassion. These people suck. So I went to nursing school, and then I was working with these nurses, not at the same hospital, but at a different hospital. And I'm like, these people suck too. So I went into nurse management, and no surprise, nurses are unmanageable because they don't want to be told what to do, myself included. And that sucked. So then I went into education, and that's when I found my path. Right. So I found my path leading and inspiring nurses, and then inspiring families by my story of where there's breath, there's hope. Right. And that I did come out on the other side of it, but it wasn't pretty, and I did everything wrong. And it's okay if you say that you're doing everything wrong too. I'm not going to judge you. Right. Because we're all just doing the best we can.
I always say you have to do what you can live with. I say that all the
100%,
time.
100%.
And if that means enabling.
Not letting other people, right. Yeah. Not letting other people write that story for you. Because it's so easy to dole out advice, right? All the people that told you when you were going through what you went through in Maryland, it's so easy for people to be on the couch telling you what to do, right? And I was watching all that unfold and listening to it, and I was thinking, my God, like, nobody's in this but you. And people are like, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. What are you doing? And I'm like, oh my God, like, she's just trying to do like the best thing that she can think of in the moment. Like, the last thing you needed was all these people, armchair quarterbacks, going, this is what you should do. It's from my experience. It's so sad, right? Because, like, all you need is people to say, like, I support you, but I don't need to give my input because I'm not going through it.
Yes. And I ended up privating all of those videos when I had somebody message me when I was on a plane up to Maryland saying, I tried pulling your daughter into the car, but she wouldn't get in. And I'm like, and she was in like one of the most Park Heights, I think is what it's called, one of the most dangerous areas in the country, probably. And I'm like, can you please get the hell out of there? And then I'm thinking she's going to scare my daughter off. It wasn't even my daughter. So
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
can you imagine how traumatized the poor person is that was getting pulled in by a stranger into the car and not knowing what the fuck was going on?
Right.
And
Not knowing the backstory. Right.
exactly. And I'm like, this was never about people going down and trying to find her ever. Like it was, that was not, I never asked that. I didn't want that. And that's when I'm like, okay, I'm taking these videos down for now. And I
You
never put them
probably
back
didn't
up.
even think that was a possibility
No,
that could happen.
no.
I mean, yeah, no, I remember like just watching that unfold, and like with people saying, just like get out of her way, stay in your lane. Those people have never been the mother of somebody in that situation, because all reason goes out the window. Like you can't be reasoned with. Like I've been there. I mean, I went to a girl's house that had sold my daughter heroin, and my daughter was standing next to me, and the girl's mother was there standing at the doorway. It was her grandmother's 80th birthday, and I was screaming that I was going to bring the police there, and then I was going to kill the girl. And the mother was saying to me, please, please, it's my mother's birthday. We're just trying to, do the best we can here, and it's not her fault. And in my crazy thinking, I was like, no, your daughter is the reason my daughter is still like this. And none of that's true. Like none of that was true, And when I say that to people, it's really true. Like and in the moment, I really meant that if this girl did not stop selling my daughter heroin, I was going to not only call the police, but kill her, because if my daughter died, in my head, I was like, well, there's no reason for me to live anymore, because she's like the only thing I had. I mean, my husband at the time and I got a divorce. My house went into foreclosure. I had nothing. I had nothing left. Like I was a shell of a person. And it's the years that it took to rebuild that, and what it took to get me back to any semblance of myself. There's times when I'm still not okay, right? Because I will think about those moments and think like, but for like the grace of God, how did I survive it? Because I don't know sometimes, honestly.
Oh no, I completely get that. And I was really, all of that really unfolded. And my whole thing is it's like, okay, she probably relapsed when she left, and which she had. And I had in my head, it was not that I was going to bring her home. It was, I just wanted to get her out of Maryland because she was nowhere close. And I knew how dangerous it was to Florida. And I told her, I was like, do you need me to drop you off somewhere? And because I just figured, for me, I felt more secure, at least knowing she'd be in the state running and using than states away. And it's, but she said she wanted to be sober. I don't know how true that is looking back, but that was a crazy time. And there were things with how that recovery center handled things that I just did not agree with. And then the interventionist and how he handled things, but who we never even hired, who I thought was, a friend, but the whole situation was just really fucked up. And it really opened my eyes to how corrupt the system can be. I know not all. I know there has to be good treatment centers out there, but it's definitely, a pretty broken system that needs an overhaul, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it needs an overhaul because it's wild to think that on one hand, Joint Commission does sort of have jurisdiction, and the state comes in and they make sure that things are, copacetic in the beginning, but then they don't come back unless there's a complaint. And the other kind of crazy thing, I don't know if you know this, but if Joint Commission approves one of your facilities, they may approve multiple facilities without even visiting it.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's great. There's a lot of nuance to the treatment industry and what they're able to get away with that would not be the case in a hospital or even like an urgent care or a CVS clinic or a dialysis center. All of those things are much more regulated than a treatment center. And, when I go and when I deal with certain treatment centers and I'm like, okay, are there locks on the windows? What's the 2-hour rounding look like? Are they 2-hour rounding on an iPad while they're sitting in a break room? Are they, where is the cameras and how is, what's the ratio with the case manager or the therapist with the clients, and how often do they see them? And I mean, what is your family program? I went to a networking event a couple of weeks ago in Florida, and there were so many people there. And as I was meeting people, I was saying, tell me about your family program. And they were like, well, to be honest, we don't have one. And I would introduce myself and I would say, I'm the link. I am the person that's going to give you a curriculum-based, consistent, 3 times a week program. And they're like, what does it cost? And as soon as we told them, they were like, it takes out away from the profit, but overall, is it really helping your family members? And there's no way you could say that this is a bad idea. I mean, it's just not. And it's amazing that we don't have a line around the block, a waiting list to get a meeting with us. It's amazing.
We don't. Yeah, it comes down to profit over patient. Well, I mean, let's face it.
It's heads in beds.
Yeah, heads in beds. It's just like hospitals. It's just like the hospital system in many ways.
Yeah, but right, because hospitals, I mean, you've worked ER. If we don't talk to the diabetic patient about diet and exercise, and are they ready to change some things up? And if we don't connect them with a nutritionist and a therapist, and we just keep treating the diabetic foot ulcer or the DKA that they're in, they're just going to keep coming back. And when they keep coming back, we just make more profit.
Correct. There is no money to be made in people who get better. And that's just the corrupt system where, in healthcare. And especially now, like you said, and now you have the rehab system, which has very little oversight. And I know how hospitals can be. It's pretty crazy. I can only imagine what some of these facilities are getting away with. And it's known that the Florida shuffle is still going on, even though there were new laws put into place. There's many influencers on social media. They have to be getting kickbacks for promoting, and they work with facilities to get them in there, even though it's completely illegal, is my understanding, and unethical. It's just a really broken system.
It really is.
Well, this went really well, and I enjoyed talking to you. And how can people reach you if they want to seek out your services?
So we are at Navigating Addiction on Facebook and Instagram. I am Dr. Murphy 32020 on TikTok, and we are navigatingaddiction.com. And we would love to have a conversation about how we can support your family member, your loved one, or your facility in providing education for the families, because they desperately need it.
Yes. And I will, in the show notes, you guys, you can find the links and the information of how to look Dr. Murphy up on our social medias. And I'll make sure to have the website posted.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you for all you do on TikTok.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to reevaluate what I'm going to do in the future, the direction I want to go with my page. But so we'll see. It's nice having this and getting to actually get to know you guys, and on a different level than just watching videos. You know what I mean? But I really enjoyed this conversation, Stacy, and maybe we can do another one in the future.
That would be awesome.
All right. You take care. Okay. Okay, so we've made it through another podcast episode. And if you like what you're listening to, how would you like to join my email list? What that's going to do is I'm going to start writing a newsletter. It's going to allow you to receive some of the more up-to-date information on addiction. I'm going to be putting reviews that people leave about the podcast on these newsletters. And it's also going to keep you informed on when new episodes release and upcoming people who will be getting interviewed. I'm currently lining those up. And so the link is going to be at the bottom at the notes section of the podcast. And I hope you'll join. I'm not going to be spamming you with tons of emails, but you're able to unsubscribe anytime, and it's been good. Take care.